Hi everyone, my name is Bertha. I am a Rhodes Scholar from Namibia studying here at the University of Oxford at St. Anthony's College. I did my first year at Oxford doing a Masters of Science in Sustainability, Enterprise and Environment, and I'm now doing a PhD looking at oil and gas future studies in Namibia, also in the School of Geography and the Environment. It is currently application season, but even if you're not applying for the Rhodes Scholarship specifically, I hope that some of the tips that I share on here about my Rhodes Scholarship application journey will help you if you are looking for tips and resources, and if you're really just looking to break down how is it that you get some of these scholarships, because a lot of this information it can really change your life, but also it's not always available. I'm going to try and demystify the process as much as possible, hopefully get you into Oxford or into another school of your dreams. The first things first, general presentation of the CV before I even get into the content. I know that it's very tempting to make your CV colorful and beautiful and bright so that it can reflect your personality, especially for some of my fellow creatives. I'll advise against that. It doesn't matter how beautiful and how bedazzled and how bright your CV is, but if the content and the substance thereof doesn't speak to the opportunity and doesn't speak to the assessors, then you would have wasted your time, really. Don't fret too much about how the CV looks. There are lots of standard CV templates online. When I was applying for Rhodes, I had a standard template format from my university. I haven't figured out yet how to edit to like show you something on the screen, but I'll try my best to put a copy of my CV. The good news for this year is that Rhodes, if you check on the website, actually has a template that they've put up there for you guys. Go on the website, have a look at what is the format. It has different sections that it's asking you to fill out, and use that as your guiding rubric for a CV. I know it's very tempting to want to submit as many documents as you possibly can, speaking to all of your accomplishments and speaking to how great you are, but don't exhaust the assessors like that, because all you end up doing is showing that you can't follow instructions. So the instruction here is send a CV, but there's already a template on the website. So go have a look and use that format as your CV. Don't be shy and don't disqualify yourself before you've even tried, particularly to women, one, but also to many of us who've grown up in cultures that celebrate humility. I'm not saying don't be humble in your application, 100% you need to do that. But the point of putting your best foot forward in an application is so that you can show the assessors on the other end how amazing you are, and that you're a good fit for whatever it is you're applying for. In this case, for the Rhodes Scholarship. Make sure that you strike a balance between, yes, humility that you need in everyday life, but also saying, this is how hard I've worked, this is how good I am, I'm at the top of my class, right? And I deserve the scholarship and I deserve to be at Oxford for XYZ reason. Back yourself, frame your CV and frame your application as if you yourself can already see yourself at Oxford. Think about some of the cool work that you've done. Don't be shy, don't disqualify yourself. Get it. Tell them how amazing you are. Tell them about all the amazing work that you've done. And don't be shy about it. You must prioritize roles that are aligned with the trust's values, right? So a good litmus test is you need to ask yourself, what I'm writing here about myself in this application, is this something that would read the exact same way in any other application for any other scholarship? If the answer to that question is yes, then you have not adequately engaged with that specific opportunity. You need to know what the scholarship is aiming to achieve, right? For the Rhodes Scholarship, it is fighting the world's fight. And that's a very big mission. So you need to present like there's a fight that you're interested in and you want to assert yourself in the world and in that fight, and that you have that fight at heart. At the very least, know who Cecil Rhodes was. What are the characteristics of a Rhodes Scholar? But they're also on the website. Truth, courage, a devotion to duty, sympathy for and protection for the weak, moral force of character, the instinct to lead. They're all on the Rhodes website. What is it about some of the roles that you have that signals that you have a moral force of character or a sense of wanting to protect the weak? I think the important thing here is you don't have to be the absolute best at everything that you have ever done. Granted, with the academic excellence there's not really a debate, right? So for that, it's a necessary condition. You need to have been academically excellent. But beyond that, you don't need to have been the best swimmer in your swimming class, or the best tennis player in your tennis class, or the best chess player in your chess club. You just need to demonstrate that you throw yourself fully into whatever it is you're doing, that you're courageous, that you're truthful, and that you have moral force of character, that you have an instinct to lead. Have a look at the characteristics and make sure that the way you frame your CV, the roles that you pick, tell a story. If I was an assessor and I was able to map each role, each experience, the way you describe the experience. And I'm not saying lie or embellish. The roles have to be factually correct, but I'm saying the way you frame them, the ones that you select, make sure that they speak to the characteristics that the trust is looking for in a Rhodes Scholar. For some people, they are understandably nervous that a lot of the roles on their CVs don't tell a coherent story. For me, I did random jobs in undergrad because I was supporting myself. I was working the admissions office. I remember literally picking up the telephone, just connecting parents, answering questions that parents had. I used to work in this art center where I was just telling people like, where's the paint and where's the arts and crafts, and cleaning up and moving chairs and that kind of thing. That's also part of a bunch of leadership programs that I really enjoyed. So when it then came to applying for the Rhodes Scholarship, I was a bit nervous that, one, maybe some of the jobs that I did weren't that remarkable or weren't that profound. I also thought that they weren't really thematically connected, because how do you go from picking up the phone to looking for paint to being part of a leadership program? But for me, I thought to myself, one, but I am the kind of person who fully applies myself to whatever it is I'm doing. So all of these roles taught me something. Tell your story. I'd like to encourage you to sit down and really think, what is the connecting narrative here? It might not necessarily be obvious. Even after you present your CV, the narrative still might not be obvious, but you need to have thought about it, because if you make it to the interview stage, you will be able to tell that story a lot easier. Summary: one, use the format that is already on the Rhodes website. Two, don't be shy, don't disqualify yourself. Three, prioritize the roles that speak to the characteristics that are outlined by the Rhodes Trust, what they're looking for in a Rhodes Scholar. And finally, don't be nervous about roles being too different. Referees. What you would have heard, or what you should have heard, is that your most senior referee is not always your best referee. I'll say that again. The most senior person that you know, the most famous person, the most impressive person, is not necessarily going to be the best referee. Maybe you have an uncle who's a very successful businessman, you know a government minister, you know a very influential head of an NGO. It is very tempting to ask those people to write a reference letter for you. But if that person doesn't know you, you are shooting yourself in the foot. I had 4 referees. I was torn because there was someone in my network who was very senior in government, and I wanted to ask them for a reference letter. And we had a relationship, but I was also nervous that this person hadn't spent enough time with me, and I hadn't spent enough time with them, which is completely fine, of course, for them to really, truly speak to my character and speak to what is important to me and speak to how I'm pursuing it. I thought to myself, I want referees who tell the full picture about me and how I've evolved over the past couple of years. The first person I asked was a professor in my undergrad who taught me in my very first year of uni. This person saw me at my earliest, at my freshest, at my most curious, when I had just come out of high school and when my interests and my thoughts weren't perfectly articulated yet. This is the person who knew what I was passionate about before I was able to articulate it. Secondly, I asked a professor who taught me towards the middle of my undergrad career. More importantly, this person also taught me one of my most difficult classes in undergrad, and I think it was energy economics. And that class, until today, when I think about it, I get shivers down my spine because it was a mix of engineering and economics and chemistry and physics and history, but it was really a baptism by fire. But I applied myself. I showed up every day. I went to that class. I sat at the front. I took my notes. I went to the extra classes. I did my best. I wanted someone to write a reference letter for me who saw me do my best. I wanted someone who could really see me work under intense academic pressure and see how I conducted myself and how I managed my time. This professor could speak to that. The lesson there is find someone who is your most difficult class. It might not necessarily be the professor that you like the most, but if there's a class where you've really transformed and you've really pushed yourself, that person, if they're a good educator who's worth their salt, probably would have made a note of that and might be able to speak to that. The third person I asked was a professor who had seen me most recently. So this professor was supervising my undergrad thesis that I was writing. And so I was seeing her every single week and we were working very closely together. And in terms of her vantage point and her perspective was the direct opposite of the first referee. She could now see towards the end of my undergraduate career how I was articulating my academic interests and the problem that I wanted to solve in the world. So I really wanted the assessors on the other end of the line to be able to tell a full story about how I've grown, how I've evolved, but more importantly, what has remained consistent about my interests and my character over the years. And then the fourth and final referee was actually from my leadership coach, who I'm still working with. I'm not saying go out and get a leadership coach if you don't have one. I recognize that I'm very privileged and very lucky to have her. But I think if you have a mentor, if you have someone who holds you accountable, if you have someone who you speak to about what you want to do in the world and how you want to do it, this is somebody who would have seen you trying and failing and getting up and trying again. For some of you, if your mentor is very, very senior, it's tempting to ask them. But if you only have a touch and go relationship once a quarter with your mentor, it's probably not going to cut it. You need someone who knows. It can be a community leader, it can be, your pastor at church, maybe someone at a place where you volunteered, someone that you've worked with on a project. It's up to you, really. But my mix was I was focused on telling a story over time, demonstrating my academic commitment and academic capabilities, and really getting my character to shine through. That has been my experience on CVs and referees. And the next video, we'll be talking about how to prepare a personal statement and how to prepare an academic statement and what the difference is between those two, giving you some tips and tricks. And I'll even read my statements that got me into Oxford. Don't play with it, don't be dishonest. Ay, still not